In July 2020, the final exclusive of the PS4 launched. It was a game that I didn't care about, probably mostly because it meant I wasn't getting another Infamous game. But then I heard some rumblings. Those rumbles grew to whispers, onward to open talking, and finally, yells from the rooftop. Across multiple publications, review videos and podcasts, everyone was saying that Ghost of Tsushima was a game that I should be involved with. So I listened. I picked up the game on launch day and dived into a 60-hour platinum experience that made summer lockdown in the UK feel like a holiday to me. Now, just over 12 months later, there's even more new content for the game and a full next-generation release. So welcome everybody. My name is Doragon and this is my review of Ghost of Tsushima, the Director's Cut. In my normal introductions, I will use something a little bit roundabout to get to the start of my full review. But this particular one has something that needs to be addressed up front. That director's cut scenario, and the cost of it. Well, let's start with, what does the director's cut actually bring beyond the original PS4 release? For starters, I have bought and played the PS5 upgrade, which does some additional things. If you're still on the PS4, you get everything that I'm going to be mentioning in this sector, barring the PS5 specific technology and better visuals, as the PS4 and the Pro were already maxed in those areas last year. The PS5 Director's Cut does implement next generation technology of haptic feedback, resistive triggers, and 3D audio. Three large aspects that impact the game heavily, can change the way that you play, and aren't a flick of a switch to implement, especially in a game that wasn't built with those things in mind. There is then the resolution and frame rate bump, up from PS4 Pro's super sampled 1800p at 30 FPS to native 2160p and a steady 60 frames per second on the PS5. Now don't get me wrong, we've had the 60 FPS since the PS5 launched thanks to a patch, but coupled with double the native resolution of the PS4 Pro, it's even better to look at. Textures are visible that simply weren't before, and this hyper beautiful world is shown off in a way that makes your jaw hit the floor once more. Loading has been hyper optimized for the PS5's proprietary SSD. The team worked wonders on a 7-year-old hard drive on the PS4, but here, it's even better. You're quicker into a game. Fast travel is instant, and menus load much quicker than before. The only thing that detracted from this seamless loading experience was the aesthetics and gear menus. However, Sucker Punch have been amazingly prompt at getting patches out, and these are now as swift as the rest of the game. Everything now has a near instant feel to it, bringing this game fully into the next generation. They've then implemented proper Japanese lip syncing, rather than the middle ground that was chosen for the original release that didn't fit either the English or Japanese words. This has meant either new animations hand-done for every single line of dialogue, or a new smart engine being built and implemented to make this happen. Either way, a mammoth task in just 12 months. We then get the entirely new content in the Iki Island Expansion. The word expansion matters here, as it is an addition to the existing game, making it bigger and telling new and expanded stories within the same world, rather than DLC that can be anything from a skin to completely unrelated story content. It is engaged with and part of the world created in Ghost of Tsushima 12 months ago, and gives us a new area and toys to play with while the studio figures out what to do next. It fits best at the end of the main game's tale due to its story beats and certain lines of dialogue, but can be played anywhere from the beginning of Act 2, offering great backstory to Jin as a character and Clan Sakai as a whole. There are nice quality of life changes too. Progress bars around button prompts that require it to be held for a designated amount of time, A streamlined options menu, access to the Legends multiplayer from within the single-player game, sounds being emitted from the controller, nuanced feedback through the controller in the Traveller's outfit, and many more little things that when brought together exponentially improve the experience. All of this comes in at an additional cost of $30 or £25 at the upper end. Again, remembering that I'm talking about the PS5 upgrade from the PS4 version here. For many, that additional cost feels like a kick in the teeth. And in a world where individuals and families are still negatively impacted by the COVID pandemic, I totally get that viewpoint. But we also have to take into account the work and position of the developers themselves. This entire studio never planned to implement many of these features. Maybe we'd have seen the Iki Island expansion at an additional cost regardless. But all of the factors mentioned before have required an additional 12 months of work on the game to upgrade it to this level. And the team also need to put food on their tables and get paid for the work that they have put in during a global pandemic. But Doragon, I hear you say. Miles Morales and Sackboy: A Big Adventure didn't charge extra for the PS5 version. Why should we pay extra for Ghost of Tsushima? It is a valid question, and one that I may actually be able to answer. Any free next-gen upgrade that you've seen thus far isn't actually a next-generation PS5 upgrade. You'll encounter one of two scenarios when coming across these games. Let's take Miles or Sackboy as examples. These are games that were developed for the PlayStation 5 system, with all of its bells and whistles being intrinsically built into the core of the games. The PS4 releases that then happened had those new features taken out and replaced with existing older ones to make the games run on last-gen hardware. This all happened during the same development cycle and was part of the creation plan from the very beginning. It is much easier to take things out of a finished product and replace them with lower spec offerings than put more advanced features into one that wasn't built with them in mind. That is why companies can offer a free, in inverted commas, next-gen upgrade for titles that were built initially for the next-gen systems and then downgraded for last-gen releases alongside. This same scenario will be true for both Horizon Forbidden West and God of War Ragnarok in 2022. You then get next-gen upgrades like Destiny 2. This is now essentially the PC version of the game, fully ported onto the PlayStation 5. It allows field of view changes, native 4K resolutions, 60 FPS in most of the game and 120 FPS in PvP. It has HDR implementation and takes advantage of the NVMe SSD for super quick load times. What this next-gen version doesn't do is take advantage of any of the next-gen bells and whistles of the console. Instead, all it is doing is offering you the same game that you knew, just looking better and loading faster. That's it. No haptic feedback, just rumble. No resistive triggers at all, no 3D or spatial audio, just the same game, looking a bit better and loading faster. The Final Fantasy VII Remake, FIFA 21, NBA 2K20, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, Control, A Plague Tale: Innocence, these all take this exact same route. Ghost of Tsushima's Director's Cut, however, is a full and proper next-generation upgrade. It does the looking better thing, sure, it does the higher frame rate thing, also does the loading quicker thing, but then it also implements those next generation bells and whistles of haptics, resistive triggers and 3D audio. It has added new content, new animations and engines, and the team has managed to do it all in just 12 months for a game that was never designed to include any of these features, and for half the price of many other games' season passes. In my personal opinion, I think the upgrade cost, considering how much better it is than the two aforementioned methods, and the work put in to achieve it, is very reasonable. And the end result? Well, you're gonna have to stick around for my thoughts on that. But when you also take into account that there is additional content for the Legends expansion in a versus Horde mode, equipment mastery and more, alongside the Mighty Legends mode getting a paid-for standalone release at £15, you are getting a hell of a lot of bang for your buck, whichever version of the game that you choose to play, even if you've already platinumed it, like me. Okay guys, take this moment as your spoiler warning. We're diving into story depth from here on out for both the base game and Iki Island. If you want to experience those for yourself, please make sure you finish the game before watching this review, or jump to the latter sectors of the review via the timestamps in the description box below. Still here? Cool. Then without further ado, let's get into it. Ghost's narrative was hailed by many in 2020 for being groundbreaking. But that word is incorrect in this scenario, and my explanation will be a thread that runs through many aspects of this game moving forward. There's nothing new or revolutionary in Ghost's narrative. Ghost's story is actually one that we have seen in many franchises in recent years. Revenge. Whether you're talking about God of War, Shadow of Mordor, The Last of Us, Ghost Rider, and a bunch of others I won't mention due to the abuse at their development studios, revenge is very much a go-to video game narrative trope. What Ghost does with that narrative isn't new. It isn't groundbreaking or genre-defining. What it is, however, is extremely well executed. Sucker Punch's framing of this narrative is very well done. It creates all of the impetus that a player needs to enter the game and enact this revenge story. From setting the scene to giving you an antagonist with actual characterization, introducing all of the currently available gameplay mechanics through narrative moments, to showing the actual human cost to innocent bystanders of the narrative's quest. It is very well done, and the revenge in this instance is framed better than we see in so many other games. The Last of Us Part 2, which launched a month before Ghost, is a personal revenge story. God of War's Greek saga is personal revenge. Ghost Runner is personal revenge. Now do not get me wrong, there is an aspect of personal revenge in Jin's story. He is angry with the antagonist and he wishes to be the one to take him out. But that personal feeling is secondary to revenge for lost souls and freedom for Tsushima as an island nation. The story handles the nuances that come with that in a deft manner, not shoving it in your face, nor making it so nuanced that the player will never pick up on it. The structure of the story follows the same tried and tested path. A 3-act arc with Act 1 setting the scene, Act 2 creating conflict, and Act 3 bringing a resolution to it all. Again, nothing is new in the structure of the tale. In fact, it is so heavily influenced by Japanese cinema that it could even be called a rip-off, or a copy. Even the characterization isn't new. A conflicted protagonist torn between doing what he has been taught, what is necessary, and many interpretations of what is right. There is a firm family character pressuring him to do what was taught, and a newfound friend pressing him to do what is necessary, both acting as angel and demon for either side of the internal struggle upon the protagonist's shoulders. Historical loss that haunts the protagonist throughout the story and makes him second-guess himself. And by this point, you should be starting to not only visualize the Ghost of Tsushima narrative with what I've said, but Spider-Man, The Matrix, Judge Dredd, Power Rangers, Bleach, Kaiju Number 8, and so many other stories across multiple mediums. As I say, there's nothing new in the narrative of Ghost of Tsushima, but that doesn't mean that it should be written off. There's never anything new in the latest iPhone. That doesn't stop them from being exceptional pieces of tech. These 9th gen consoles aren't doing anything that hasn't already been done by PC. That doesn't make them bad. In fact, they're exceptional, especially for the cost. While there's nothing new here, what is here is done exceptionally well. It is rare for me to be able to say that I do not feel that there was a misstep in the narrative at any point. Even in a massive open world where there is distraction around every corner, the pacing of Ghost's story is done in such a manner that even if you do spend 3 hours collecting flowers, sword skins and bandanas, the narrative still has appropriate pacing when you return to it. Now, most of this is achieved through simple dialogue lines, which tend to come at the end of your interaction with an NPC. One that is used semi-regularly is, "When you are ready, meet me at wherever." It's a very simple line, but it is one that carries such weight in narrative flow for an open world game that it should never be undersold. It means that you as the player then have autonomy about how to approach the next story mission. You can go straight there if you wish, or even turn the console off. It even means you can mooch around the world collecting materials to upgrade your weapons and skills, then when it suits you, pop off to the aforementioned location. When you are ready, gives the player freedom to play and experience the game in a manner that suits them, and everyone will experience it slightly differently due to this. The NPCs then have lines that match that sign-off when you meet back up with them. Thanks for coming. You made it! Are you ready? These keep the belief that this is in fact how Jin experienced this conflict, even though your approach is different than all of your friends and myself. It's so important, because pacing in open world games is so often poor, just from the nature of their design. Having these verbal nods in many different dialogues, while such a simple thing to do, achieves what the rest of the industry seems to struggle with, and provides appropriate pacing in an open world throughout the game. Along with the solid pacing, the narrative itself is also solid. Riffing on history and using gaps in the real-world knowledge to create the story, Ghost of Tsushima tells a fictional tale around the Mongol invasion of Tsushima. The tale revolves around the protagonist Jin Sakai, the current head of Clan Sakai, an actual real-world samurai clan from Tsushima that became silk farmers and bankers after a dignified surrender, and still exists today with Tadahisa Sakai running the Chido Museum in the Yamagata Prefecture on the mainland. Jin, however, is a completely fictional character. He rides into battle controlled by the player in the opening sequence and somehow survives the complete defeat of the samurai on Komoda Beach. Nursed back to health by Yuna, a thief who teaches Jin different ways to achieve the same result and often with less trouble, Jin is the last samurai of Tsushima to stand against the Mongol invasion. One samurai, however, is not an army. And to succeed in his goal of driving the Mongols out and defeating Khotun Khan, Jin takes on a persona created by Yuna to breed hope in the Tsushima populace and fear within the Mongols. This is a brilliant narrative thread, as Jin is at odds with his success as the Ghost for much of the game, as it flies against everything that his uncle Lord Shimura taught him about honour and how to fight. Now, most of this happens within Act 1, and I absolutely love it. It made me instantly respect Jin as a character, as he was willing to forgo his own sense of honour and correctness to save as many lives as possible. A choice that many of us would not make. He risks familial and royal bonds, even his family home and lands, along with his own life. But the more he risks or lets go of, the more confident he becomes. The more he grows as an individual, and the more people congregate around him as a beacon of the way to end the Mongol invasion. It's a scenario we've all seen, either in entertainment media or in real life, time after time. An individual who is no longer weighed down by the constraints of their past for whatever reason, and they suddenly blossom into something new and brilliant. Now yes, Jin blossoms into Death Incarnate. But it's Death Incarnate to free people, to save people, not to mindlessly kill everyone in sight. He still holds the honour of staying his blade from the flesh of innocents and helping out with materials, finances, manpower and such where he can. The dynamic continues as an undercurrent through Act 2, with an amazing breakout moment around the midpoint of the entire narrative. At that moment, narrative, characterization and gameplay are in perfect synchronization. There is a brilliant suspension of disbelief for a power fantasy and a rousing moment of victory for the everyman. That moment is the Siege of Yarikawa and Ghost Stance. At this moment, the player realizes that Jin is all in on the Ghost persona and is no longer a samurai. He is a man willing to do whatever it takes to save Tsushima and its people, and it's a freeing moment for the player. No longer are you constrained by Jin's samurai roots if you don't want to be. You are completely free to play how you want with all of the Ghost's tools and skills at your disposal, both mechanically, but maybe more importantly, narratively as well. The end of Act 2 deals sucker punch after sucker punch on the player as well, heightening your involvement through emotional attachment. The simple lack of plot armor for a major and beloved character is brilliantly shocking at Taka's execution, and the execution solidifies the player's resolve to eradicate the Mongols and Khotan Khan from Tsushima. The rift that is torn open between Jin and his uncle as they retake Castle Shimura changes the entire dynamic of Jin and his relationship with the whole of Tsushima Island. Now, I was never a fan of Lord Shimura. He was too straight-laced and his beliefs would cost more and more lives on the battlefield. But he was so important to Jin, and it has a notable negative effect on the mindset of this amazing character that I'm playing as. Then, there is the fiercest and hardest moment to play through. Your horse's death. Nobu was my horse. We had done so much together. I loved that pixel horse. And I am not ashamed to say that I wept heavily upon his loss and had to stop playing the game for 2 days solid just to come to terms with that moment. Now, once again here, none of these moments are unique or groundbreaking. Heck, I've played most of these moments in other games recently. Even Sucker Punch Productions themselves have already used the rift between friends and family thing twice before in the Infamous series alone, with Zeke and Cole in both Infamous 1 and 2. Now, while these factors aren't new, once again, they are executed flawlessly. This fact is why they hit so hard, why they create the emotions within the player that Sucker Punch were aiming for, why you, as a player, want to progress, or as I did, stop and digest what just happened. The writing team, directors and animators have pulled well-known threads from all over the industry, knit them together and delivered them in a manner that means you would never see the joins if you weren't looking for them, and they are therefore ultimately very engaging and enjoyable to experience. The concluding arc follows a similar thread, but rather than focus on the conflict within Jin, it actually allows him to flourish outside of a few particular moments that involve his uncle. This is beautiful. It allows the player and the character to grow together, to solidify a gameplay and player identity before the game's conclusion. It even allows you to side with the decisions that Jin makes to fight the Khan and include his uncle in the battle. This connection and build-up means there is huge satisfaction in the final confrontation and cutscenes, and massive emotional distress in the epilogue, where you fight and then either spare or kill your uncle. Player choice, that final bit, and it was as brutal as losing Nobu or having to kill Zeke in Infamous 2, whichever option you chose. You know what I'm going to say, so I'm just going to highlight it. Nothing new, exceptional execution. The narrative in a nutshell is that comment. It's nothing new, but it's exceptionally well done. From characterization of the protagonist, antagonist, and all supporting characters, to open world game narrative pacing. From wide view impactful side missions that grow the world, scale, and cost of the conflict, to superbly crafted main game story missions. Superb execution on Sucker Punch's behalf has elevated what could be classed as a rip-off in lesser hands to excellent in Ghost of Tsushima. It isn't the greatest story ever written or groundbreaking in any way, but it is something so much more important than that. Engaging, enjoyable, fun, and satisfying. This review, if you haven't gathered already, is most likely going to end up as a series of "there's not a lot new here, but" moments. And mechanics, well, there's not a lot new here, but they are great. Now, there are a couple of things that I can understand that people wouldn't like. The floaty jumping of Jin, for example. Now, I'm a massive Infamous fan and actually really enjoy the floaty nature of Sucker Punch characters. But that's because I've known them for 2 generations now, and previously it perfectly fit the character. Ghost is using an updated engine from Second Son as far as I'm aware, and as such I went in expecting a slightly floaty, slightly sticky protagonist. But many didn't. My partner was one of those people, and she finds Jin's floaty stickiness really aggravating. The thing is, it works. In the situations that you have to use the climbing and jumping mechanics, they actually assist and complement the gameplay. but they can hinder you when attempting to jump out the way of an enemy attack, and Jin veers sharply left to grab the nearest ledge. It isn't broken or wrong, this one just comes down to acceptance and personal preference. Combat was one that the community took umbrage with, when there was a lack of lock-on mechanics at launch. This has been updated in the director's cut, and if you wish to lock on, you now can. Personally, I never use lock-on mechanics in melee combat games. It doesn't matter what game they're in, unless certain actions simply won't work if you don't lock on. My reasoning is that locking on feels like it ruins the fluidity of combat. It detracts from my ability to react to attacks from other foes and take the appropriate action. It's not a mechanic that I missed or begrudged being omitted from the original release, but it's a really nice gesture from Sucker Punch to add that in for those in the community that feel they need it. One that I simply can't understand though, is people complaining about fall damage in the game. Now there are games out there that do not utilise fall damage, and they have their place. Monster Hunter is one that immediately springs to mind for me, but games that do have fall damage within them, to me, are often better. A simplistic thing of judging a jump becomes a risk and reward scenario. If you make it, you're advancing drastically. If you don't, you're dead and having to start again. Removing that risk means that open world traversal and platforming sectors quickly become trivial and boring, something that you never want to happen in your open world game world. Therefore, the simple inclusion of fall damage keeps those moments engaging. It's not like this situation can't be adjusted through skills, armour and charms in the game, allowing you to jump from a higher height and survive, or even nail the landing. It's an aspect that Sucker Punch put quite a bit of thought into, to make it a skilled traversal mechanic, rather than just something that happened. That level of thought feels like it's been focused on every aspect of the mechanics. Combat is beautiful, nuanced, and frenetic. Depending how you approach a situation, you can end up with swathes of varied enemies attacking you simultaneously, meaning you have to be alert, not just to their location, but their weapon type, build, and armour too, because all those factors inform you how to fight that particular foe. You then have to react to that information that you've acquired, switching to a sword stance that best counters your next foe, switching handheld weapons like kunai, smoke bombs, and black powder bombs for tactical retreats or attacks, and then using the correct attacks and timing to defeat that foe. While doing this, you have to be aware of other attackers, their builds, their weapons, and their armour, and prepare to do the same switching around for them. It can get quite confusing to watch if the player is constantly switching things up, but the combat flow gained from the ability to switch all of this while still in the melee empowers the player to feel like they can take on any enemy. Now there are some idiosyncrasies with the combat that can't be overlooked, and they do prevent me from calling the experience exceptional. Timing is a big one. I've put hundreds of hours into this game, both in the single player and multiplayer experiences, and timing can be weird wherever you play. There is a move within the game called the perfect parry. Now timing doesn't just affect this move, but it's a prime example of it, because I still don't know the perfect way to pull this off. I've played the game on lethal mode, the hardest difficulty setting, where one hit from an opponent and you're dead and vice versa. And the perfect parry is the best way to turn combat around for yourself. But while you'll perfectly parry one foe, the next one, with what feels like the same timing, will miss, and may well result in your death. Now there's no visual or audio cues to pull off this move, unless of course you turn on accessibility settings. Instead, it's knowing when within an enemy's animations to hit the button to perform it. But while I may be able to pull that off 3 times on the trot, the 4th time, while looking and feeling exactly the same as the previous 3, will fail. It's not the end of the world, and it really doesn't detract from the experience overall. It's just a weird idiosyncrasy that does hold the combat back somewhat, as it also affects dodging smoke bombs and a few other moves that have timing involved in their structure. Timing aside though, combat is so rewarding when you use it, either in 1v1 scenarios via the epic and cinematic duels, or in grouped melee combat. As the character grows, obtains more tools and skills, the player is constantly changing things up, flicking between the most useful aspects of combat for that moment in time. I find it so engrossing and rewarding, and while there are some inhuman feats within the system, Sucker Punch knows when to apply the ethos of because video games to make things more fun and suspend that disbelief. Now, stealth is the other side of the combat coin, and it isn't the most in-depth mechanic we've ever seen, but it is satisfying and rewarding. It actually feels very akin to a series that I adored before the revelations of abuse at the development studios. It felt like the proper Assassin's Creed titles of old, and not the garbled paint-by-numbers copy and paste mess of Odyssey or Valhalla. So what do I mean by that comment? Stealth involves planning, awareness, and execution. While the AI won't go looking over the top of walls and such a la Uncharted 4 crushing mode, it is smart enough to hear you approach from behind if you're too quick or heavy, unlike something like Deathloop, where AI will constantly ignore you. The enemies have an obvious cone of visual detection that allows you to approach them easily whilst out of the line of sight. But they then have colleagues on overlapping patrol paths that fill in the blanks and will alert your target and other enemies if you are caught attempting to sneak up. This means you must plan all stealth approaches, especially on the higher difficulty settings that I play on. You have to watch for openings and chances on patrol paths, and then take your chances. Use the skills and tools that you have obtained and unlocked. Get in swiftly and out again to not gain the attention of the other enemies. Then, as much as possible, rinse and repeat, hopefully clearing the entire area. For an old hat Splinter Cell, Assassin's Creed and Metal Gear Solid player like me, I found this approach to stealth so fitting and fun, something that I haven't felt in any game's stealth mechanics for many years. As you progress, you amass a massive assortment of tools and skills to bolster stealth. From faster assassinations to chain assassinations, from short and long-range bows to silent poison darts, distractions from bells or firecrackers to create openings, and smoke bombs or kunai as offhand throwing weapons. Charms, essentially perks or mods as known in other games, can allow faster movement when hidden, to not be spotted when assassinating from grass, for slower detection speeds, and so much more. It means that you can build a loadout and approach stealth in so many different ways, and create a playstyle that fits your personality. My partner, as an example, has never used a smoke bomb, but she utilises kunai in nearly every situation. Whereas I will use smoke regularly, either as a retreat option if stealth goes wrong, to quickly finish a combat encounter, or to take out a group silently. Clearing even just part of an occupied area with Ghost's stealth mechanics, before entering or accidentally triggering open combat, feels so damn rewarding in a manner that I almost can't verbalise, because it's simply not done anywhere else in the industry anymore. Ghost is a game that gives you tools and options that allow you to approach any situation in any manner. You can sneak around or go in all guns blazing, or any level of mixture in between. If you are going stealthy, you are not then punished, outside of 2 main story missions, for being spotted and having to enter open combat. If you change your mind when one approach is proving too hard, you have the tools and options at your disposal to change approach on the fly and reassess. It is, in my eyes, a superb design decision, as no matter what happens, gameplay keeps going, and it therefore keeps narrative and gameplay flow intact. We then come on to the UI in this game, and it is one thing that I can't say is nothing new, as this is new, and it's amazing. There isn't really any HUD or UI when you're in the game world, but it's then there when you need it, i.e. during combat. For me, this heightens the immersion of the title, as I'm not distracted by flecks of colour on the screen or trying to look through aspects of the HUD to discern what is going on. There are no waypoints or map markers when navigating to a new location. Instead, you follow the wind, which looks straight out of a Studio Ghibli production, just in 4K here, and is easily called upon via the DualSense's touchpad. Everything that ever appears on the screen while you're playing has had so much purposeful design put into it to ensure that it conveys all of the information that you require, but doesn't intrude upon the experience. The menus are where you'll then find the rest of the information. There are many pages to inspect and change things around in, and due to how many aesthetic and gameplay affecting items you can attain, you spend a lot of time in these menus adjusting charms, outfits, and more. At launch of the original title, this would take quite a bit of time to achieve, because the 7-year-old hard drives in the PS4 and PS4 Pro couldn't access the information any quicker. On PS5 though, these menus are all instant following a patch released about a week after launch. It's a small thing, and you still spend a lot of time in menus, but when you want to change something now, it changes as you press the button, not 3 to 5 seconds later as with the original PS4 release. What you'll find for most of the mechanics and design in this release over the original is that they add so much in terms of quality of life. It's all the simple things that make a massive difference, such as instant fast travel, the ability to swap an outfit within seconds rather than nearly a minute and get back to the action, the fact that you can see textures on outfits that you simply couldn't before, even when playing the PS4 and PS5 versions on the same PS5 console, the feedback through the controller and the 3D audio adding an additional emotional layer by immersing you with music and sounds as well as visual cues. On-screen button prompts have changed their status bars to wrap around the button on screen rather than be a little progress bar next to it. The white colour of the button prompts is in line with the controller that's in hand, rather than the coloured ones from the previous gens, and looks so much cleaner when playing. There are 1,000 or more of these tiny little things that I could go on about, but it is so much better to just experience them in game rather than listen to a massive list. Just know that all of these minor changes coalesce to change and enhance how the game actually feels to play, elevating it in my eyes to one of the best feeling games ever made. That's not to say that every design choice of the director's cut is great. Cutscenes are a weird scenario to get into, but they are one of my main complaints with the game, and I want to highlight the whole saga. At the original release, all of Ghost's cutscenes were pre-rendered. This is why the game was so large on PS4 hard drives, because you were installing multiple 1800p videos that would be triggered at certain points in the game. As these were pre-rendered for PS4, they were recorded and animated at 30 frames per second, because that is all the PS4 could do. Upon the PS5 launch, however, there was a 60 frames per second patch, and at the same time, the game got smaller by a considerable amount. The cutscenes now rendered real time in the game engine. Okay, it meant on the one hand there were longer transitions. Some of the smash cuts from the pre-rendered to gameplay and so on just couldn't happen in engine. But all the cutscenes were now 60 frames per second. Then launches the director's cut, and now we get an odd mix of both previous scenarios. Most of the big story moments are 30 frames per second, but the little chats pre-mission are 60 FPS. Why? The PS5 is obviously capable of 4K 60 with this game at all times, so why are in-engine cutscenes suddenly capped at 30 frames per second? It's really jarring jumping back and forth between the two different refresh rates at every big story moment, and it feels like a step backwards from the previous 60 FPS patch. Maybe it will be addressed in a later patch, that Sucker Punch have been stunning at churning out and fixing issues with this update, but as it stands right now, it feels like such an odd decision that does detract from the game for me. The director's cut also brought a litany of bugs and glitches with it. Considering I never encountered a single bug prior to the director's cut release, this was disappointing to encounter. But I do have to offer credit where it is due. In the space of a single month, Sucker Punch released 9 patches to fix bugs, glitches and quality of life scenarios, and they've already committed to releasing even more patches to keep the game in tip-top shape. Considering what CD Projekt Red has released for Cyberpunk 2077 that still hasn't fixed things in 10 months, and what Ubisoft haven't fixed in 1 year of Valhalla, Sucker Punch can stand proud as a consumer-centric studio that look after their customers and do right by them in both the short and long run. Overall, Ghost of Tsushima is a tightly honed mechanical and design experience. Most aspects you will have seen elsewhere in the industry, but there are major aspects here that are completely new and can be honed in newer Sucker Punch games to perfect them. To me, this game feels akin to Infamous 1 in its story and most mechanics, and I therefore would expect any follow-up to be akin to the perfection of the formula that Infamous 2 was. Sucker Punch know how to make a super solid and fun game, and that's true here as well. Ghost of Tsushima is just the latest in a long line of superb titles from the studio that are all must-plays for any PlayStation owner.
The Iki Island expansion is what I and many others expect was the main factor for the director's cut additional pricing, and it brought us more Ghost of Tsushima outside of rerunning the main campaign and Legends. Iki was my first experience of the director's cut. I went into it on my original save before partaking in the New Game Plus. And, well, it started like this.
It worked.
There's not much that can match up to that original Sting card and opening, seen at the beginning of this review. But Iki does a damn good job of getting very close, and it acts as a springboard for what comes thereafter. For me, and in short, Iki Island is how additional content should be done. Narratively, this is a side story to a degree, but it's also more than that. It starts as a confrontation on Tsushima's North Island that you access from Act 2 onwards, and has a village poisoned, going mad, and dying. This has been perpetrated by Mongols that are led by a general known as the Eagle. She sits on Iki Island and is aiming to poison all of its residents. Though hesitant, for reasons we will learn later through flashbacks, Jin journeys to Iki to put a stop to yet more Mongol forces. It seems like a simple setup to give us more Ghost of Tsushima, but this felt like more. It felt like an experiment to see what the studio can do moving forward. And as an experiment, additional content and expansion, I loved it. The story had me hooked, and willing to write a stern letter to Sucker Punch if they killed yet another horse on me. Thankfully, Kage survived the stormy crossing, and we set about liberating Iki. Immediately, things are different from the main campaign. For starters, Jin is 100% alone at the start of Iki Island, and while he does form some allied bonds with residents of the island as the narrative progresses, the dynamic is very different to what we're used to from the original release, and everyone is distrustful of everyone else. It creates a tension that is only heightened as Jin remembers repressed memories of his father's conquest of Iki Island, to which Jin was a tag-along, where Kazumasa Sakai earned the name The Butcher of Iki, and lost his life in front of Jin's young eyes. It recreates the internal conflict from the main game, which allowed Jin so much growth, but in a much more personal and impactful manner. Regardless of what you think of Kazumasa Sakai, personally, I think he was deplorable and Jin's personality has nothing to do with his father, Jin watched his father die at a very young age, and due to being a Lord of Tsushima, has never really been allowed to deal with his grief and entangled emotions. As Jin has also been poisoned by the Eagle's brew, this grief and emotion takes on a visual and audio flair, with the Eagle's voice becoming the voice of Jin's darkest thoughts, and rising to the surface. These thoughts occur at the most inopportune moments of gameplay, as they would rise at stressful or important times in reality, and they mess with the narrative's direction and the player's ability to react to enemies and situations too. It's a brilliant, interactive look into grief and all of the emotions that come with it, and more importantly, dealing with that grief. Through a 10 to 20 hour quest, depending how distracted you get with the golden birds, you see Jin's history on Iki and with his father, see the damage that this has done to Jin, and see the man that he is now come to terms with the demons of his past. And it's all wrapped up in the same beautiful storytelling, combat, traversal and stealth from the main game. So Sucker Punch pushed their protagonist further here, and it worked brilliantly. Mechanically though, I think this might be even better. This expansion has obviously been built with the next gen in mind from the word go, and really utilises the DualSense controller well. From playing beautiful flute melodies at shrines to entice the local wildlife in for a fuss, done via motion controls and staying inside a tune line, to a feeling of weightiness with the grapple hook that just isn't as pronounced in the main campaign. There are new exploration tools that utilise the resistive triggers exceptionally well, where you use the grapple to pull items down, across or into position, and open up new traversal routes. Then, there is a force, weight and fluidity to the combat that somehow feels even better through the controller than the exceptional combat in the main campaign. Sucker Punch utilised both the PlayStation 5 and DualSense incredibly well with the Iki Island expansion, going far beyond what is in the main game of the director's cut. It isn't just more of the same from the main game. It's a new story while completing an unfinished one, and an expansion on existing mechanics and game structures. It builds upon what was there before, and while remaining familiar, offers just enough of the new to feel like a progression for the game, player, and character alike. The depth of content and rewards to chase are engaging and wondrous, and should be held high as an example to all other publishers on how to do additional open world content right. Iki Island is an advancement of the Ghost of Tsushima formula. It completes a beautiful character arc for the protagonist to have him set for whatever may be next if this game turns into a franchise, and shows just how immersive this could be as a series on the PlayStation 5 console. It looks better, plays better, feels better. Everything about the expansion is a step up over what we got 12 months ago, with upgraded and new charms that massively change your gameplay, and are upgraded through gameplay, new mythical armor sets and perks that are part of them, new and better feedback to the player both on screen and in hand. It almost feels like Iki is a sequel to the PS4 title from 2020. That is the difference that 12 months have made, and it makes the wait truly feel worth it. Iki Island alone is worth the £25 upgrade cost in my opinion, and all of the other stuff that it then brings with it and adds to the base game, well, that's just a bonus. Multiplayer is not something that I thought Ghost of Tsushima needed. In my eyes, it was an obvious Game of the Year contender just off of the single player, and having seen it in many franchises before, I was worried that Legends, the free multiplayer expansion, would detract from an otherwise excellent experience. But then the trailer and info dump happened. Legends was a fantastical spin-off of the Ghost story, bringing Japanese mythology to a wider audience. The whole thing was co-op. There was no versus mode here. It had your standard horde survival mode type things, and a gear grind, just as we're used to in all Battle Pass enabled games. But Legends was free. There was no Battle Pass. All rewards were earned through in-game challenges and RNG drops. And it all started with story content. Story that was broken down into 9 chapters that would then culminate in a 3-act raid. Ghost of Tsushima was going full Destiny on us, and bringing experiences previously limited to MMOs and Destiny to a console-only action-adventure game. The Nerd Migos and I have put a lot of time into the Legends mode, Heck, a big chunk of the background footage that you're seeing here is our first raid. Legends surprised me, just like the core game, in the best possible way. Once again, you had options of how to play, but this time, that boiled down to which class you chose for a mission. You want to play support? Then you're a Ronin, mate. Middle of the melee? Pick up a samurai. You prefer to attack from range? Take the hunter class. You want to be sneaky stabby? Then it's assassin for you, my friend. The story missions for Legends are 2-player co-op experiences, and they're brilliant. Each mission is made up of 3 maps connected by supernatural Torii gates. The maps are filled with enemies, and as you progress, Goizen, the Legends storyteller that you can encounter in the main game, narrates what is going on. Each story has 3 difficulty levels that can be chosen at will, starting at bronze and progressing through to gold, with higher levels offering higher key leveled gear and legendary rewards upon completion to improve your power and abilities. Once at gold, you then unlock weekly nightmare challenges for loot that will get you towards the key level or power level for the raid, which is the culmination of the Legends story content. Alongside the story content, you also have Survival, Nightmare Survival, and the new PvEVP mode called Rivals. Survival sees a team of 4, any composition that you want, take on wave after wave of enemies while protecting 3 bases from being lost, a la Control, Hardpoint, Domination, etc. Again, there are 3 difficulty levels and a nightmare option thereafter, offering varied experiences and more sources for rewards to get you raid ready. Rivals sees a race between you and the opposing duo. You defeat enemies who then drop a currency that you can collect and spend. Spending the currency hinders your opponent's progress, but more importantly, advances you towards the final confrontation and victory, known as the Last Stand. The Last Stand is a slayfest where you and your partner must defend a zone from 3 increasingly difficult waves of enemies. If you both fall, you have to start from wave 1 again, giving your opponents a chance to catch up and overtake. So risk and reward strategies are required here. Now, matchmaking is available for stories, survival, and rivals. However, you can queue up as a duo, trio, or quad for survival, a 2-piece for rivals and stories, and the story missions can also be completed solo if you want an additional challenge. These varying modes mean that there is generally something within Legends that will scratch a gameplay itch for that particular day or mood, which in turn gives the mode so much longevity, as there is always something that you want to go and do, or achieve, or acquire. The raid, the 3 Tales of Io, is brilliant. An experience that is 10 levels above what you can achieve power-wise means that in terms of combat, it is always a challenge. Then come the mechanics, communication, switches, rotations, Spider-Man type traversal, and big bosses that can't be brute forced. Instead, you have to juggle power-ups, timers, and debuffs to succeed. It is a pure endgame experience that anyone who has played a raid in, say, Destiny, Final Fantasy XIV, or any other MMO out there will take huge satisfaction from, both on first beating it and then in perfecting it. As a first raid experience for many console gamers, there aren't many better options out there, even in the mighty Destiny, which has been doing console raids for 7 years now. The entire mode is built towards getting you to raid, and it achieves this in the most satisfying gameplay manner possible. But at the same time, if you don't want to raid, you don't have to. You can enjoy ripping through things in Bronze Survival as much as you want. You can run the story missions again and again, and maybe even look to speedrun them. The feeling of victory in Rivals is so fulfilling on its own. Now, I love the raid, but as much as this mode is geared towards getting you able to raid, it never hinders you if you don't want to, unlike so many other multiplayer experiences out there. I love Legends. It took an already brilliant experience, expanded it, and even elevated it, giving me a brilliant social grind in a pandemic-riddled world. The joy of beating raid chapters, nightmare challenges, and achieving new aesthetics is phenomenal, and seldom repeated elsewhere in the industry. The fact that I don't need a village to raid and just 3 good mates makes the experience accessible, and also means that toxicity is kept to an absolute minimum. The mode just hits so many good notes for me, and in a world of very samey generic looter-shooters with battle passes, shows that going your own way and doing something completely different will always reap the best rewards. So £25 or $30 US. Is Ghost of Tsushima's director's cut worth it for what you're getting? For me, this update changed and enhanced the feel of the game. The visuals, frame rate and load times are nearly enough on their own. These things make such a massive difference to any game experience, and it's tough to experience last gen load times and frame rates once you've experienced the 9th gen. But at the same time, we've seen they can all be unlocked with a free patch, such as in 2018's God of War. The work that was put into upgrade aspects to 9th generation technology was exceptional, and from a work-reward perspective, again, worth the cost of entry alone. But just adding haptics, resistive triggers and 3D audio alongside controller audio support doesn't feel like a £25 upgrade to the consumer, when content-wise, everything remains the same as 10 months ago when Legends launched. The additional Legends maps and modes, while implementing all of the great features previously mentioned, could also be deemed worth it. Heck, you pay more for less with annual CODs and Assassin's Creeds, and literally nobody moans about the cost of those DLCs, map packs and skins. But these are also available to the base game owners of Ghost of Tsushima, completely free of charge. The Iki Island Expansion is definitely worth it in my opinion, as the scope and quality of the expansion far outstrips anything else offered on the market as additional after-launch content. And it costs less. But here's the thing. For that £25, you get all of this that I've just mentioned, and you get the quality of life updates, and the amazing after-launch support, and the transparent communications from the studio, and an amazingly fun time, whether solo or social. Additional content, instant loading, 60 FPS at 4K, PS5 exclusive features like haptics, triggers and 3D audio, an entirely new PvEVP game mode, 7 new maps, new survival maps, new key levels, weapon and item mastery, cursed items and raid challenges, improved visual design, console-specific gameplay, easy save game transfer. And these are just the things that I can remember off the top of my head while writing this, and say whilst my breath holds out. The reality is, the list goes on. There is so much work, so much love, so much care and attention that has been and continues to be paid to this game by Sucker Punch. It's a passion project and a labour of love for them, and that comes across in nearly every moment. So £25 for a huge list of impactful additional stuff and upgrades? Hey, I'd say that upgrade feeling is pretty darn good. Ghost of Tsushima was a great game upon its release, with expertly executed narrative and mechanics. It knew when to say, because video games, to increase the fun and engagement, and used enough real-world history to ignite a passion in many that would go on to save a Shinto shrine in the real-world Tsushima after tornadoes had damaged it. The after-release Legends mode was a huge freebie and excellent experience, even bringing a raid with it, something that only Destiny had done so successfully on console previously. Once again, this mode was executed flawlessly and extended the lifespan of the game at no additional cost. The director's cut changes the game in many small but significant ways, heightening the immersion and changing the way that you experience the game on a PS5. The additional narrative gives Jin more depth and settles ghosts of his past, setting him on an even keel should there ever be a sequel. Quality of life changes that accentuate the next-gen upgrades only serve to change this game for the better, and after a combined 400 plus hours across the single and multiplayer, I am still left wanting more. At £25 or $30 US, the amount of additional content and upgrades is an absolute steal, and Sucker Punch have proven yet again that honouring the consumer can only yield positive results. There are of course detractors in the game. I'm yet to play a perfect title that doesn't have bugs, crashes, missteps, or weird idiosyncrasies. The important thing for me is that the detractors that I do encounter don't hold the experience back. There's nothing game-breaking here, and the few weird things that you do encounter are funny more often than not. There's graphical clipping on the costumes for the character model, sure, but that doesn't bother me, and was around the only graphical misstep in the entire game, single-player, multiplayer, or expansion. There is a blissful lack of microtransactions, meaning all of the best loot comes from gameplay and time investment, rather than predatory pay-to-win in-game stores a la Pokemon Unite with £30 skins, or Ubisoft single-player games with £15 perfect perk armor sets that can't be earned in-game. With a freedom of approach unlike any of its peers, Ghost delivers the same yet divergent experiences to everyone who plays it. It allows a player their own gameplay identity, and regardless of what that is, it then melds perfectly with the character identity, and as such, builds a level of emotional attachment rarely felt in other games. For me, Ghost of Tsushima was a strong, if not the strongest, Game of the Year contender for 2020, and the director's cut has re-elevated it to be a possible contender yet again in 2021, with an expansion that on its own could challenge for that title. This game is amazing. It's fun, rewarding, satisfying, and a joy to take part in. You can load it up to wander the island and take in the sights, or enter into hyper-difficult endgame content, even after the campaign is done. It's relaxing or a challenge as you need it to be. And as an added bonus, the wider community are very welcoming to any and all new ghosts. To put it simply, Ghost of Tsushima is a pinnacle experience, a wonderful and engaging game, and one that every single PlayStation owner should play. I would like to thank you all very much for tuning in. Ghost of Tsushima is one of those games that hasn't left my hard drive, whether that be in the PlayStation 4 or the PlayStation 5. Through constant updates, bugs being patched, and, entirely new versions of the game being released, Ghost has always given me something that I want to do. I've played it multiple times, I've put hundreds of hours into the Legends mode, and I keep coming back. I keep wanting more of it. The characters, the world, the mechanics, the sense of reward for your playtime is just exceptional. And there are very few rivals, as I've mentioned multiple times through this review, elsewhere within the industry. I really want to commend Sucker Punch on what they have achieved with this game, especially to someone who was so dubious about it because they weren't getting more Infamous. So well done, team. Whoever you are, whatever job you have done at that studio, you are part of this experience. The cleaning staff are part of this experience, because without a clean workstation, the team couldn't have created this. The tea and coffee makers, the canteen staff, again, without you there, without you supporting the people, putting the time in on the computers to make this happen, the game wouldn't have existed. So every single person who has worked at Sucker Punch Productions through the production of Ghost of Tsushima, I would personally like to say a big thank you, and I know there's a massive community out there that would join me in saying such a thing. As I say, there are niggles and flaws with the game. I've never played a perfect title, but they really don't faze me. They don't bother me, because the positives are so positive that these minor niggles don't really factor into my enjoyment of the title. So that's it, guys. That is my review of Ghost of Tsushima, the director's cut. Please don't forget to do the standard process for a YouTube video. Hit that like button if you enjoyed the content. You can also slap that subscribe and the bell next to it to see notifications of when new content goes live. Leave a comment down in the descriptions in the comments section below, I knew what I was trying to say, about your thoughts on the game. And don't forget to follow me on the socials from the links in the description box below. You see, I just got the two bits mixed up, that's all. Otherwise, guys, your viewership is more than enough for me. Thank you so much for your time. My name is Doragon. This is my review of Ghost of Tsushima, the Director's Cut. And until next time, guys, have yourselves an absolutely fantastic day. And take care.